Last October, my younger cousin Theo and I, both in our early 30s, took a trip to the Colorado wilderness for a weekend of fall camping. Theo had found a secluded spot near Elkhart Trail, about a 2-hour hike from any paved road. He handled all the planning as usual. I just came along for the escape. By the time we reached the site, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It felt peaceful, detached from everything else. We set up camp in a small grassy opening. No signs, no fire pit, just open earth and the quiet rustling of leaves. Exactly the kind of silence you don't get back in the city. We noticed a few odd things right away. The clearing wasn't clearly marked, and it wasn't obvious whether it had ever been used before. Still, we figured it didn't matter. As we looked around, though, we started spotting random items left behind. An old, half-buried sock, the rusted cap of a canteen, a snapped walking stick, half covered by leaves. At first, it just felt like nature had slowly reclaimed someone's forgotten trip. But something about the randomness of it gave me pause. I didn't say anything to Theo. He always brushed that kind of stuff off. We cooked some dehydrated meals and chatted as the sky dimmed into a deep indigo. We laughed. It felt good to just be out there with nothing but the trees and stars. As night fell, we built a fire and leaned back on our sleeping pads, watching the flames crackle under the cold mountain air. A few hours into the night, I saw it, past Theo's shoulder, a tiny flame flickering far beyond the tree line. I sat upright and pointed. "There's something over there," I said. Theo turned to look. It took a moment, but then he nodded slowly. There it was, a faint orange glow, far enough that we couldn't make out anything around it. There was no trail that way, no clearing we'd passed. "Huh," Theo muttered. "Guess we're not alone after all." We stared for a minute longer. The light didn't move. It just shimmered, faint and distant, between the trees. "Maybe they wanted to be far from people too," Theo added. Neither of us said more. We tossed a couple more logs into the fire, opened some trail mix, and talked ourselves to sleepiness. Around midnight, we doused the fire, crawled into our tents, and zipped up for the night. I woke up later, unsure what time it was. It had to be past 1 a.m. I'd had a bit too much water before bed. With a groan, I grabbed my boots, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the cold. The air had turned even sharper, and the forest was wrapped in darkness. The only thing that broke it was that same faint flame, still burning in the distance. I walked about 40 feet from the tent, far enough to avoid attracting animals. As I stood there, I found myself staring again at the flickering firelight out in the woods. It seemed too steady, like it hadn't changed in hours. My eyes adjusted more and more to the dark. That's when I saw it, something in between our camp and the distant flame. It was shaped like a person, still, upright. A chill slid down my spine. I blinked hard, convincing myself it was just a crooked tree or a bush catching the light strangely. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it had a silhouette too clean for that. And then, just beyond it, another, and another. My chest tightened. There were figures, several of them, standing scattered through the forest, watching. 10, maybe 15, all just there. I couldn't breathe. My first instinct was that I must be seeing things. Maybe I was just exhausted. But then something shifted. One of the figures moved slightly, just enough to shatter the illusion that this could be my imagination. I stumbled back toward the tent. I I wanted to scream, but my voice felt buried deep in my throat. I fumbled at Theo's tent flap, then opened it and shook him. "Get up," I whispered urgently. "There's someone out there." He groggily sat up. "What?" "I saw people. They're out there, between here and that campfire." He looked at me for a second, confused, then climbed out, zipping up his coat. I led him out to the edge of the trees where I had stood, but we didn't even make it all the way. They had moved. The figures were closer now, still scattered, still silent, but unmistakably human. Just watching, I looked at Theo. The blood drained from his face. "Jesus," he whispered. They were real. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't want to find out. Theo and I took slow steps backward. "Should we leave?" he asked, his voice trembling. It was the first time I'd ever seen him scared like that. I nodded. We didn't speak again. We didn't grab our gear, just our car keys and wallets. Everything else stayed. We turned and bolted back the trail, the way we came, stumbling through the dark with only Theo's headlamp to guide us. The whole way, we never heard footsteps. We never saw them follow, but I never felt safe. Not until we reached the car and locked the doors. The police didn't take our report seriously. Said we probably just misjudged some shadows or imagined hikers out late. But I know what we saw. When I think about the random junk left behind in that clearing, I wonder if others saw what we saw, or worse, if they didn't get the chance to run. It was early September of last year when I, 29-year-old Logan Pierce, decided to spend a quiet weekend alone in the Sawtooth Mountains of central Idaho. I'd been overwhelmed at work and hadn't had a moment to breathe in months. I wanted quiet, solitude, just me and the trees. No phone signal, no emails, no people. I arrived around 3 p.m. after a 2-hour hike from the trailhead. The air was crisp, but not cold, and the pine-covered peaks surrounded a small alpine lake like a protective ring. I pitched my tent about 100 feet from the shoreline, nestled behind a thicket of tall trees. The area felt private, peaceful. I unfolded my camping chair, cracked open a can of beer, and leaned back. The sound of wind brushing through branches and the occasional chirp of birds was oddly therapeutic. I remember thinking to myself, this is exactly what I needed. The sun dipped behind the ridge faster than I expected. Golden rays faded into a blue dusk, and I gathered wood for a fire. As the flames danced, casting shadows along the edge of the trees, I began to feel a slight unease. It wasn't anything specific, just a quiet tension creeping in, like a string pulled too tight. I shrugged it off as nerves from being out there alone. Still, every few minutes, I found myself glancing into the trees behind me. The shadows there felt heavier than usual. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the warmth of the fire and the cool air on my face. But the feeling didn't go away. By 10 p.m., the darkness had settled in completely. The moon was mostly hidden behind drifting clouds. I stared into the flames, trying to clear my mind, but my body was tense, alert for no real reason. It felt like someone was out there, watching, but whenever I turned my head, nothing was there. Just empty forest. You're being ridiculous, I told myself. You've camped alone before. It's just your mind being dramatic. Still, I grabbed the flashlight from my backpack and set it beside me, just in case. At 11:14 p.m., I remember checking my watch. A loud crack shattered the silence. Not a branch falling, not some squirrel scurrying. It was like a thick stick being crushed under something heavy. It came from directly in front of me, just beyond the firelight. I froze. My beer slipped slightly in my grip. I slowly reached for the bear spray I kept in my side pocket. My heart pounded so hard, I could hear it in my ears. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Someone there?" No reply. Nothing moved. I stood, flashlight in one hand, spray in the other, and pointed the beam into the darkness. It cut through the trees, illuminating branches, rocks, trunks. But no one was there. I held the light steady, sweeping it back and forth. I even walked toward the sound, maybe 15 feet from the fire's edge. Still nothing, but my gut was screaming. Something had made that noise. I went back, stoked the fire higher, and sat down again. Only now I couldn't relax. I kept scanning the dark like my life depended on it. And then, 15 minutes later, I saw it. A figure, just on the edge of the light. A man. He was standing completely still, partially obscured by a pine tree, but I could see enough. He was tall, incredibly tall, maybe 6'5" or more. I couldn't see his face, only the silhouette of his body. As soon as my light hit him fully, he turned and slipped back into the shadows. My stomach dropped. My entire body turned to ice. He had been there, watching. I jumped up, grabbed my backpack, and began tearing down my tent in a frenzy. I shoved my sleeping bag, tarp, and food into the pack without folding any of it. I couldn't stop thinking about how long he had been standing there, how long he had been watching me without making a sound. I didn't want to run blindly into the forest. I needed light. But I also didn't want to stay another second in that clearing. I headed out on the trail with my flashlight on its lowest setting, trying not to trip. Every step felt like it echoed through the mountains. I kept checking behind me, certain I would see that silhouette following, but the path stayed empty. Half a mile in, I allowed myself to breathe again. I stopped, leaned against a rock, and tried to make sense of it. Why hadn't he said anything? Why didn't he approach? What did he want? I thought about the crack in the woods, about how close he must have been, and the fact that he didn't move until I saw him, like he was waiting. The rest of the hike back to my car was quiet. No signs of him, no footsteps behind me, but the feeling of being watched never left me. When I got to my truck, I locked the doors and sat there in the dark, engine off, just listening. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the weight in my chest. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? A guy stood in the woods and stared at me. There was no crime, no threat I could prove, just presence. Since that night, I've tried camping again. Once, in a much more public area, but even then, I didn't sleep. I kept checking the perimeter of my site, flashlight in hand, waiting to see a shadow between the trees. Now, even at home, I keep curtains drawn. I avoid the windows after dark. I triple-check the locks. I tell myself I'm just being cautious, but I know it's more than that. I still don't know what that man wanted, but what scares me most is the thought that maybe he didn't want anything. Maybe watching me panic was enough, and maybe he's done it before. This happened back in late August of 2020. My name's Daniel. I was 35 at the time and living in a small town at the edge of Oregon's Cascade Range. I'd just come off a stressful quarter at work and decided I needed a break, not a beach trip or a city weekend, but true isolation. So I packed up my gear and drove 2 hours into the mountains to a Forest Service campsite near Lake Broken Bow. The campground was tiny, just 3 designated spots. You had to park in a dirt lot and hike about 5 minutes through dense pine forest. to reach any of them. There were old grills and benches left by the park rangers, all in pretty bad shape, but they still worked. When I arrived, the place was completely empty. No other cars. All 3 sites were wide open. I chose the one furthest from the trail entrance and started unpacking. The air was cool, and the shadows were already stretching longer than I expected. I set up my tent near a large fallen tree, then sat on a rotting bench and cracked open a drink. For the first hour, I just soaked in the silence. No phones, no traffic, no voices, just the wind and the occasional call of a jaybird. It was calming, even beautiful. After a while, I got up to explore. Maybe there'd be a trail or something nearby. I walked back toward the entrance, but there wasn't much else beyond a few forest maintenance signs. What did catch my attention, though, was a car parked next to mine now. An old, rusty red sedan. A Toyota, I think. It looked like it had been through hell. Dents, peeling paint, cracked windshield, and strangest of all, no license plates. Not on the front, not on the back. I paused and stared for a bit. Maybe they just forgot to reattach them after fixing the car. But who drives deep into the woods without plates? I felt a small chill creep up the back of my neck, but shook it off and returned to my sight. 10 minutes later, I was sitting on a log near my tent when I heard footsteps coming down the trail. I turned, and there he was. A man, mid to late 30s maybe, but something about him felt off. He was dressed in a stained brown jacket with holes in the sleeves, and his pants were caked in dirt. His hair was shaggy and oily. His beard looked like it hadn't been trimmed in months. He had no backpack, no gear, nothing but the clothes on his back. He locked eyes with me immediately, not in a friendly way, not in a passing by hiker way, just direct. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he asked, voice casual. I blinked. Sure, I guess." He smiled quickly. "Not right now. Still gotta get a few things ready, but I'll come back and grab you in a bit." Before I could say anything, he turned and walked off into the trees. I stood there, confused. Why ask for help if he wasn't ready? Why walk all the way to my site if he just wanted to say he'd come back later? Still, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just awkward. I returned to my spot, poked at the fire pit, and waited. But as time passed, 15 minutes, then 30, I started getting that feeling again, like something was off. By the time the sun was dipping behind the ridge, he still hadn't returned. I figured he must have handled whatever it was on his own. I let it go and made dinner over the fire, trying to shake off the unease. But as the sky turned black and the stars came out, that feeling intensified. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of wind through the leaves felt sharper. My ears stayed tuned to the trail behind me. Then I heard it. Footsteps, steady, heavy, getting closer. I turned and looked. Couldn't see anything. It was pitch dark beyond the glow of my campfire, but the steps were coming down the same path as before. And sure enough, after a few seconds, he appeared. Same man, same blank stare, but this time he was silent until he was practically in the light. "You ready?" "Still need a little help," he said. That odd smile stretched thin across his face. "With what?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, as if I'd asked something rude. "Only take a minute. You're not busy by the looks of it." He chuckled, like it was a joke, but my body tensed. I didn't like how he avoided answering. I didn't like how he'd waited until it was completely dark to come back. I didn't like that he had no flashlight, no bag, nothing. Still, like an idiot, I nodded. Sure. We started walking, me slightly behind him. The firelight quickly faded behind us, and the forest swallowed everything. I had a small flashlight in my jacket and clicked it on, keeping it low. Where are we going? I asked. He didn't respond. I asked again. Still nothing. I stopped walking. He kept going for a few steps before turning around. That same creepy grin on his face, but now it looked different, like it was forced. His lips twitching, teeth tight. I stepped back. What do you need help with? I asked firmly. He didn't answer. Then his hand dropped into the side of his coat. Slowly. That was it. I turned and ran. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body just launched into motion and kept going. I don't know how long he chased me. 30 seconds? A minute? I heard footsteps behind me, crunching fast, breath heaving. But eventually, it stopped. I didn't stop running. I didn't stop until I saw the glint of my truck's bumper under the moonlight. I jumped in, locked the doors, and called 911. By the time the officers arrived, the red Toyota was gone. So was the man. I gave them a full description. The car, the clothes, the hair, the smile. But nothing came of it. They had no record, no reports, no leads. I went home and tried to move on, but I couldn't. I started locking all my doors twice, sometimes 3 times. I stopped going to isolated places. If I hear a twig snap outside, I freeze. If someone knocks on my door after dark, I don't answer. The worst part? Sometimes I still see that smile in my dreams, right before he reaches into his coat. And I know I got lucky. Someone else might not have.